Good evening. I would like to call our Town of Sidney regular council meeting on Monday, March 27th to order at 6:04 p.m. I'm Mayor McNeil Smith and our my six council colleagues in the chamber. To my immediate right, Councillor Garnett, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Duck. To my immediate left, Councillor Rentoul, Councillor O'Keefe, and Councillor Novick. Good evening to members of staff who are in the council chamber this evening and who may be participating via Zoom. We will introduce them if they're called upon to speak or introduce this evening. And good evening to members of the public here in the council chamber this evening, and to those who may be watching the live recording or the live webcast of our meeting, or watching a recording of our meeting at a later date. Please come in. Do we have an additional chair for this? I'd like to continue by respectfully acknowledging that we are holding our meeting this evening and that in the traditional and ancestral lands of the Wasanich people, and we express our gratitude to the Wasanich people for their stewardship of these lands and waters for millennia. In turning to approval of the agenda, the third item on our agenda, I have some changes and additions to the agenda. The first change is to move item 4D-D1, which is the receipt of a petition regarding Ardwell Avenue, to immediately after public participation. The second change is to move item 6A, which is the development variance permit and the development permit applications for White Birch Road, to immediately after 5A, the zoning bylaw amendment for White Birch Road. These two changes have the benefit of council considering the three agenda items for 2060 White Birch Road concurrently. The effect of the two changes will create the following order of agenda items for us to start this evening. The first, in just a moment, will be public participation period. The second will be receipt of a petition regarding Ardwell Avenue. The third will be the public hearing regarding the zoning bylaw amendment for 2060 White Birch Road. Then we'll go to item 5A, which is council consideration after the public hearing, council consideration regarding the zoning bylaw amendment for White Birch Road. And then council will go to 6A, which is council consideration regarding the development variance permit and the development permit applications for White Birch. We'll then circle back to item 5B on the agenda, which is the water utility rates and charges bylaw, and 5C, the sewer services charges bylaw. And we'll then continue with item 6B and the remainder of the agenda as it's presented. Since the agenda was posted last Thursday, we've received additional correspondence. That includes a letter regarding updating of our zoning bylaw, which is item 13D, and that's correspondence from Mr. Carlsen from the Sidney Community Association. That letter will go under that item. We have 27 additional letters of correspondence, so we received 21 letters of correspondence on the White Birch application. And they are in our council package as it was posted last Thursday, and we've received an additional 27 items since then, and we have on our agenda 6 items with regards to the Wildflower Place development, and we've received an additional 4 items of correspondence. Council has received all of these items of correspondence and had an opportunity to review them before this evening's meeting. So with that, I would seek a mover to approve the agenda as amended.
I move that the agenda be approved as amended.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. All in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. So we'll now turn to public participation, and just a note for the many members we have in the chamber this evening. We do have a public hearing which will allow everyone the opportunity to speak with regards to the White Birch development application. If anyone is present who would like to speak to another item on the agenda, please come forward at this time. You will have up to 4 minutes to speak, and we'd ask that you provide your name and the municipality you reside in, and we just have a little button to make the microphone live. Please come forward. Good evening.
Your Worship and Council, my name is Teresa Salamone. I'm a resident of Sidney, and I come before you today to bring to your attention the opportunity of a lifetime. never again in your public tenure will you have a decision that is this easy to make, that it will benefit so many people and at such low cost. I speak in support of the request by the Peninsula Community Pickleball Association and the Sanet Peninsula Pickleball Association to use a portion of the Sidney Anacortes Ferry terminal property for temporary pickleball courts. I've submitted a written statement with more details, but we'll use this time to just very quickly highlight some of the main points. As background, you know that Washington Department of Transportation Ferries Division has indicated that they won't be activating the ferry terminal until 2030, but intend to comply with their lease during the interim period. As you know, that the ferry grounds comprise structural amenities as well as extensive parking areas. As additional background, you've probably sick of hearing how popular the sport of pickleball has become, and BC is no exception. In 2022, there were 13,000 members of Pickleball BC, which is an increase of 158% from year to year. A third of the registered pickleball members of Pickleball Canada are from British Columbia. In our local area, there's 500 pickleball players, and the numbers grow daily. Unfortunately, there are no dedicated pickleball courts in Sidney. There are 2 multi-purpose courts, one of which is not usable as a court until it gets maintenance, which may or may not happen in May. So that leaves 1 multi-purpose court shared with tennis players for all the paddle enthusiasts in Sidney. And there's no reservation system for this court, which means there's no opportunity to organize group play or even to guarantee court time. So with that background, I'm going to return to the amazing opportunity that I mentioned that presents itself to you with this temporary ferry shutdown. 6 quick points. First, you can use the existing ferry terminal grounds for pickleball by simply painting lines. No existing public facility uses would change, no existing capacity would be reallocated, and the cost would be minimal. We bring our own nets, we bring our own balls, we bring our own paddles. All we need are lines. At the end of this temporary allocation, the ferry terminal goes back to its primary use at no cost. To compare, the construction of a new pickleball court is $45,000 or more, and if you did that, you might affect existing resources. So the temporary use proposal would be a fraction of that cost and change nothing. Second, the existing terminal lease allows this compatible temporary use. Now, I'm a lawyer. I have to say that's not legal advice, but I've done a little analysis of the terminal lease, and I can see all the opportunities for this shared new use. Third, there are amenities and available space on the property for lots of different uses, and we in the pickleball community embrace that opportunity to share this facility with lots of different uses. Lots of space for additional parking. There's an existing washrooms. There's existing cafeteria. You could open that up for amenities for lots of members of the community. Fourth, the terminal during its lease and the pickleball community are covered by insurance. And if you want a copy of our insurance, we carry liability insurance, we're happy to provide that. And you will see under your lease what the terminal insurance is. Fifth, the pickleball community can make this transition cost-effective by fundraising and providing in-kind support. We have many members with varied and extensive resources, both financial and serendipitously, we have line painters among our members. So we are here to support this effort. Sixth, and this is what you're going to hear the most about, is the noise from pickleball. You've heard that. I've got a lot of details about decibels and this, but I'm just here to tell you shortly, the ferry terminal is the ideal location for additional temporary courts. It's a suitable distance from existing residents. It's already immediately adjacent to 2 park uses. It's under the flight path, and the ferry noise, during its normal, the BC Ferries anticipates 165 decibels is the normal decibel of a ferry. Pickleball is 64 decibels. So I'll let you think about that. So just in short, thank you for your time and attention, and I'll just say that there is everything to gain and nothing to lose by moving ahead with the proposal to paint some stripes. And there's lots of ways to configure it out there. There is a lot of asphalt out there. So I asked you to consider that, and happy to answer any questions or bring you more information.
Thank you, Ms. Salamone. We do appreciate you coming forward and advocating strongly, passionately for pickleball. And colleagues, your colleagues in the associations have been before council certainly in recent years. I noted you did receive a letter of reply from staff, and I will perhaps read some of that and provide remarks in that the town of Sidney and Washington State Ferries currently have a lease for that Sidney terminal property, and the lease does not provide for an additional use at this time. So Washington State Ferries is going through a process in Washington State at the moment, which will unfold in the coming weeks. And then the town of Sidney and Washington State have to discuss how that lease will move forward and what process we may embark on with regards to the future of that site. So I appreciate you coming forward, but it will be some weeks before we're able to come forward to the public because of the lease that is currently in place. I can say that your request and other requests or interests that have been expressed will certainly be moved forward to discussions that council may have in the future.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just say I have not got that reply from your staff that explains that the terminal lease does not allow this. So
Okay.
I look forward to getting that reply from your staff.
Sorry, the staff did reply on March the 20th saying, thank you for sharing your suggestions to find alternative uses for the Sidney Anacortes Ferry Terminal. We recognize this is a significant waterfront site in the community. At this time, council and staff are looking into the existing ferry terminal lease, which extends to 2031, while considering how best to move forward given the recent announcement. I realize that there may have been some additional information for you this evening, but.
Yeah, so you're saying that your staff has done an analysis that the lease does not allow a secondary use?
We were in discussions with Washington State Ferries under the current terms of the lease.
Okay, all right, thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'll call for a second time if there's anyone wishing to come forward to address Mayor and Council.
Oh, you can go first. Ladies first, that's fine.
Please come forward.
Okay, I'll make this quick because I'm sure other people want to say a few words. My name's Gwyn Davie. I'm the one who initiated the petition of the sidewalk on Ardwell. And couple of things I'd just like to bring to your attention. I did send an email to council regarding an inconsistency in the active transportation plan. And I've got this was sent out to the houses, and at the top it says Table 2, Summary of Draft Priority Sidewalk Improvements. Now I know this is alphabetical order, and I know that Ardwell is not the second priority, so that's all good. So it is on the Summary Draft Priority Sidewalk Improvements, S2, which is right there. So if you go into the areas of concern that are on the active transportation plan, it's Appendix A, and it's page number 21. This sort of states active areas of concern. Ardwell is not on that. The density of cycling concerns. Now this is one I'm sure you've all seen. Ardwell's way up here. All these little orange dots are clusters of areas of concern. There are no clusters of areas of concern for cyclists on Ardwell. That's page 23 of Appendix A. And this is the pedestrian concerns, and that's page 22 of Appendix A. And it's the same thing. All the areas of concern seem to be lower down by the highway, Beacon Avenue, and areas like that. So I would like you to just think about that. One of the reasons, as I've stated before, is I spent over $50,000 putting in a driveway. It took a long time. This was my house before, when I bought it. And this is my house now. It took a lot of money, a lot of time, and I take great pride in my home, and I would encourage other people to take pride in their homes because I think it makes Sidney just look so much better as a whole. So the last thing I want to say is I don't think that the expenditure of $675,000 on a sidewalk on Ardwell is necessary. I think it's too much money. We already have a sidewalk. Take the money, put one on All Bay. They don't have any sidewalk, and they have a bunch of hidden driveways. It's quite treacherous to walk around All Bay in the evening because there is no sidewalk. Thanks very much.
Thanks for coming forward this evening, Ms. Davies. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Sean McIntyre. I reside at 2305 Malaview, sorry. So I'm just coming back. In December 19th, my wife and I applied to remove the 6 trees in front of our house on the boulevard. We were denied, asked to provide sufficient supporting documentation and proof that these trees were in fact harming our infrastructure and did pose an immediate risk to our health and safety. You said that you'd be open to a compromise. I have submitted for that compromise, and I'd just like to speak about a few points. During the time between December 19th and now, we've undertaken the following. We've completely replaced our perimeter drains to rule out our own failing infrastructure was not part of the cause of our basement's flooding. During these efforts, we found numerous root balls within our pipes. Once our pipes were repaired and everything was complete, we experienced flooding once again. We went into our crawl space to investigate. I scoped the lateral that went all the way to the street, to the city connection. I found it was completely collapsed between 2 trees. Frustrating, understandably so. I don't want to have to keep having to clean up water in my crawl space. The town enacted the repairs over the course of about 3 weeks. Additionally, we had a third-party arborist assess and provide a written report on the condition of these trees. He found the trees to be in declining health, partially due to the lack of proper maintenance carried out on said trees being one of the key factors. Through a freedom of information with the town, these trees had been found to not have been maintained for 5 years, except for the last time that my wife and I called in October to get them trimmed. So I find the preventative maintenance strategy of driving around to observe trees without documenting it is not satisfactory in any way. Myself, I'm a maintenance planner for the CRD. We deal with all the water pump stations and wastewater pump stations. I can assure you that if we were driving around to just go look at pump stations, we'd have some bigger issues happening right now. The trees are within 3 meters of the power lines. Our transformers are located on top of those poles as well. That creates high voltage. Limits of approach, as per BC Hydro, should be 3 meters. I've actually worked for BC Hydro in the past at one of the dams as a millwright in my previous life, and I take limits of approach quite seriously. We're requesting that 3 trees come down so that we can basically stop further damage and having our laterals severed again, root balls in our perimeter drains, more flooding. The fact that we still have big branches over top of our driveway that can fall down after a windstorm. My wife and I also wanted to provide off-street parking for a suite and a garage that we're looking at building. We don't want to move forward with going and building that, or sorry, applying and getting like all the engineering done, just to be told, no, you can't provide off-street parking. Now we've spent additional costs. This is our first house, we're trying to make a go of it. So for me, every dollar counts. As previously stated, I'm happy to replace these trees with additional trees elsewhere in the community. I take climate change and zero net canopy loss seriously, and I'm asking that what I'm asking I don't think is unreasonable, and I hope with the documentation and effort put forth by us kind of shows you how seriously we take this. I did bring 6 copies of the full arborist report because I did read the director's report and I found that she snippeted some of this report and didn't provide the full context. So if you'd like that, I'm more than happy to distribute it to council.
Okay, I think we're good at this time, and I'll turn to staff if they have any concerns. If you wish to distribute it, Mr. McIntyre, please go ahead.
Okay.
And thank you for coming forward with your input this evening. That's okay, I'll be okay.
I'd share on my phone, but. Thank you. Thanks, Ange.
Okay, I'll call for a second time. Anyone wishing to come forward to address council, please come forward. Good evening.
Hello, it's on already.
It's on already.
Linda Comber, Sydney. I wasn't going to speak tonight, not on this subject, but about the tree removal on boulevards. We hardly have any left on boulevards as it is. And if people can just say, well, we want to have off-street parking for our tenants and then get boulevard trees cut down and not replaced on the boulevard, it really does take away from the enjoyment of streets in Sydney. You know, tree lines along streets provide shade and decrease the temperature, and they were there a long time ago, and just because you come in and all of a sudden you want to move there and you want to build it and you want to take the trees down, that doesn't seem quite right to me. we have less than 14% coverage of trees now, less than that. And other communities have way more and are trying to get more and build more and plant more trees. And I think we need boulevard trees to enhance the beauty of our community and make it more livable. And they're on our property. They're on city property. And if they started cutting down all the boulevard trees because people didn't like them there would be none left. And I don't think that's the way it should go. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. I'll call for a third time. If there's anyone wishing to come forward, please.
Mayor, members of council, Dennis Carlsen, Sidney Community Association. I'm here speaking on the update to the zoning bylaw. I understand our letters in your package, so I'll keep my comments really brief, but basically to reiterate, and going through and reviewing the staff report regarding the updating of the zoning bylaw, we noted the statement that a high level of community engagement was not deemed necessary because of the OCP process that was followed. It gives the impression to us that this seems to be contrary to council's commitment as stated previously to ongoing community engagement. We would encourage council to take advantage of expertise of committees such as the APC and undertake public engagement at each stage of the bylaw update. Not engaging the public until the final draft we expect will be problematic, as you have experienced with the active transportation plan. In closing, our objective as the Sidney Community Association is to assist in the creation of a zoning bylaw that meets the objectives of the OCP, but at the same time ensure community engagement through the process. Mr. Mayor, if I could speak to another item on the agenda tonight.
Please.
These comments are in regards to a notice of motion on your agenda to amend the strategic plan. It appears that council will be deleting actions regarding affordable housing, such as pursuing opportunities for partnerships, and instead focusing on the provision of affordable housing through review of the zoning bylaw. It gives the impression that council is walking back on their commitment to affordable housing as stated in their strategic plan. As you are well aware, addressing the issue of affordable housing is a very complicated issue and requires a comprehensive toolkit. It needs more than simply relying on a zoning bylaw. Thank you.
Mr. Carlsen, if I might clarify, I appreciate that the notice of motion is rather lengthy with several whereas clauses and reference to clauses that were in the 2018 to 2022 strategic plan, and then reference to the current the wording in the strategic plan that this council adopted early in our term. And it is not the intent to remove the clause that was in the last strategic plan and is in this strategic plan with regards to partnerships and collaboration with other entities and looking for opportunities for affordable housing. It was to broaden the scope of the particular clause that the sentence that the amendment is in.
Okay, I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. And I believe we have a, I'll call for, please come forward. And council, if I, yep. Just one moment, sir, just before you begin, if I could have a resolution to extend public participation,
So
please.
moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor? Motion carries. Please go forward, or if you could just press the little button at the bottom, you'll have a live microphone. And your name and municipality, please.
My name is Bob Lougheed. I live at 10186 Wildflower Place in Sydney. Been there a long time. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the variance permit application at the Wildflower Place, Amherst Avenue location. I do not support this request for the following reasons. The developer purchased the property, formerly identified as 10181 Wildflower Place, at significant cost. A subdivision of this property followed, obviously with the development of 2 single-family dwellings, where one house was situated for many, many years. The house has since been demolished. The property looks like a war zone, like out of Ukraine, but nevertheless, that's beside the point. The proposed dwellings require significant variances to setback requirements established by town staff. I would think that any developer would have done its due diligence and been fully aware of the restrictions identifying the acceptable footprint of proposed dwellings not requiring any variances, but instead have forwarded proposals that are no doubt endeavoring to maximize return on the investment. This is a speculation development. The obvious question is, for me, is why do we establish the setback requirements in the first place? Also noted in Ms. Fletcher, town staff, report to council was a statement, and this was very concerning to me. Staff note that a property owner may renovate the building to accommodate a rooftop patio in the future without requiring a variance. Whoa. I was unable to get any information from staff as to when this could actually occur. Would it be after a building occupancy certificate was issued? After a certain amount of time? It seems ludicrous to me that initially a variance was required in the first submission, and the developer removed the rooftop patio access issue in the application now before council. A question that really needs to be answered. So I respectfully request that council reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward.
Put my Canada hat back.
Please come forward.
Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Alan Lowe, 1750 Patley Place, Victoria, BC. I'm here to talk about the Amherst Wildflower development variance permit that's being requested tonight. I wasn't going to say anything, but with the previous speakers just saying a few points, I just thought I would just come up and just advise that within the Local Government Act, it does allow for development variance permits. Development variance permits are actually a planning tool that one uses to determine whether or not one could actually make for a better development. The developer here is not trying to maximize. You will see that by the size of the buildings that he's proposing. He's not trying to build to the setbacks that's required, and not trying to maximize the heights as well. If he was to build to the setbacks required under the R1.1 zone, he would be allowed to build a 2-story building up to 8, possibly 9 meters, 2.5 stories. And it would actually be built about 7.5 meters away from the natural boundary, which is towards the waterfront. Imagine seeing this building, or 2 buildings, all along Amherst, as people are driving or walking down the public access that you have going down to the beach, you will see two-story buildings going all the way through. And not to mention, as you're going down towards the beach, this building that is built within the zoning bylaws will actually block the views as you're going down towards the beach on the left-hand side. And then, not to mention, the overshadowing of the neighbor to the north, which I think with the proposal that's being submitted today, the building itself is a one-story building with a raised living room area. The portion next to the property to the north is only 3.3 meters high, one story. And I think that they've been very cognizant of that and have worked very hard to create a building or two buildings here that will actually fit within the neighborhood. And we would request that you do support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. I'll call for a final time if anyone's wishing to come forward to address council this evening. Please come forward.
Hello, I'm coming here again in respect of 2060 White Birch Road. And
Sorry, ma'am, we will be having a public hearing,
okay, a second.
which will provide you
So
another
this is-
opportunity
okay,
to come
thank you.
forward, but thank you. And I'll call for a final time if there's anyone wishing to come forward. Seeing none, I'll close public participation. Thank you for everyone for coming forward in that portion of our meeting this evening. I will now turn to item 4DD1, which is receipt of a petition requesting a sidewalk and bike lane not be built on the north side of Ardwell Avenue. We have a letter and a petition from Gwen Davies, who presented earlier this evening, dated March 14th. Councillor Rintoul.
I'll move receipt of the petition and refer it to the advisory ATP engagement process.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Councillor Rintoul.
No, thank you. Thanks for coming forward. Thanks for your efforts to canvass the neighborhood and get the feedback for council. As we're aware, it's a draft plan, the active transportation plan, and we're really looking for this sort of community input. So thank you for that, and we'll look forward to seeing other comments that can be considered as a part of the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Duck, the seconder.
Yeah, I appreciate the information and the effort went into collecting this information. There's certainly some standards within Sydney that vary from location to location. So, as my colleague Councillor Rintoul mentioned, this will go to the ATP. Just of note, I did review all the signatories to the petition and noted that only just over 50% were from Sydney. So just relative to collecting that, you may want to focus more so on the residents of Sydney. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. I think further to Councillor Duck's comment, I'm not sure if this would be a friendly amendment or would require a second motion should this one fail, but rather to separate the letter and the petition. I consider this petition invalid for us to accept. Not only were half of the respondents not from Sydney, a number of them were not even from Canada. I don't believe that this is the sort of petition a government should be accepting. Those who are from Sydney, a number of the comments weren't from people from Sydney. That, the letter writer and people who live within Sydney can participate in the ATP process under the process that we have, but that we should not be receiving petitions from people from other countries on whether they think we should be building sidewalks in our town. It's just not appropriate.
Councillor Duncan, if you could make a motion to separate
Sure.
the motion between the letter and the petition.
Yeah, my apologies. I should motivate it before I moved. I moved to separate the letter and refer to the ATP engagement and not to receive the
Okay,
petition.
so we'll do them
Sorry.
one at a time. So
Okay.
the first motion will be to receive the letter and
Motion
refer
to
to,
receive the letter.
and refer to the active transportation plan. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Okay, further deliberation on the letter being received? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I also thank people for making their comments. I guess what I would just say to,
Sorry, Councillor O'Keefe, we're not going to speak about the petition, we're speaking about the letter.
okay, I'm fine with the letter. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion on the letter, I'll call a question. All in favor? That carries unanimous. Councillor Duncan, I'll turn the floor back to you.
Move not to receive the petition.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. I'm going to turn to, before motivating further, I'll turn to staff. If staff wishes to provide council with information on petitions to be received by the town and council.
In our council procedure bylaw, it indicates a petition to be received first by stating the clear purpose of the petition, as well as the name, address, and signature of the participants, or of the petitioners.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan, the mover.
Thank you. And I suppose I already motivated, but simply that was my rationale, that this petition was not collected in the way that we require in order to receive them as information respective of our municipal business and our, spending of our tax dollars and how we do our business. And so, the people who are from Sidney who want to provide feedback have a mechanism for that now, and we don't need internet petitions that were collected improperly with biased questions by third parties and that extend to people outside of our municipality and our country.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm not going to reiterate the points made, but I actually counted 213 approximately out of 242 are not from here. Missouri, Japan, 9 of the 19 comments were not from Sidney. In fact, one was from North Saanich, where they thought we should put the money into McTavish Road, which is in the district of North Saanich. So it caused me to have real concern with the petition. That's why I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe and then Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. I support the motion. One of the main reasons is because I think it's important for citizens to direct them to the appropriate places where we have opportunities for feedback. And so what I worry about in accepting online petitions, often the individuals don't get information as part of that petition to make an informed choice, and it directs them. I don't know how many of these people actually participated in the very robust town's engagement process and the survey. So what I would worry about is that people get the impression that I signed a survey, therefore the town knows what my feelings are, and they don't bother to participate in the engagement process that we've already designed for that purpose. So for that reason, I think it's a good idea to send the message that this is not the way to send feedback on issues to the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And look, I concur. We still have some 200 Sidney residents who have signed this and who have used this as a mechanism to raise the concern with council. I don't think our consultation is limited to following the town's process. Where I do have a concern is that if the signature is required and we haven't fulfilled that, then I think it needs to be filtered before it reaches this point in the process and comes to council, because we certainly have received petitions of this nature and without signature in past and kept them as part of a consultation process. So I'll continue to support the inclusion of this referral to ATP process. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Novak.
I would like to support the inclusion of this petition too. I acknowledge the comments and the arguments that many of the signatories to this petition are not legitimate and not valid for the purposes of the town. That being said, there are certainly a significant number of signatories who are residents of Sidney and who may have a valid opinion on that process. And I think it would be unfair not to give them their opportunity to be heard through the petition process. We can simply invalidate those signatories that don't conform, or at least that are not residents of Sidney. But I agree with Councillor Rintoul that this petition should at least be considered, and those residents of Sidney's voices should be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novak. I'll comment briefly in that this petition does have 442 names on it, and 217 of the names are from other municipalities in Greater Victoria, the Capital Region, Vancouver Island, other cities in the province of British Columbia, other provinces in Canada, most of the other provinces in Canada, and a number of countries from around the world. And so the concern is that Sidney, elected by Sidney residents, wants to make the decisions in the best interest of the residents with input from residents. Of course, there can be individuals who live outside of Sidney, as close as North Saanich or beyond, that have an interest in what we do in Sidney. This is with regards to a sidewalk on a street, on a significant street in our community. So I do have concerns that the petition was submitted with these additional names and doesn't meet the strict definition of our procedure bylaw. However, I think given that online petitions are increasing in frequency, that we should, the next time we are doing amendments to, or considering amendments to our council procedures bylaw, have a discussion with regards to more clearly defined parameters on petitions. One of the comments made by a colleague was with regards to the questions that were on the petition, or the statements that were on the petition, and whether they were, as I think Ms. Nelson stated in our procedures bylaw, said they should be clear, and words to that effect. I think it's very difficult for council members to judge the statements that are on. I mean, there may be misstatements, but I think without deliberating on the statements individually, it would be difficult to challenge those statements, although it's within the purview of council to do that. So I think we've noted the concerns we have with regards to the submission of this petition. We know Sidney residents have had many opportunities to provide input to our active transportation process, and I think the staff can, or council can consider this petition in light of council's comments when it's received with the other active transportation feedback, when all that comes forward to council in the next month or so. We'll leave my comments there, and if I see no further discussion, I will call the question. All in favor? Sorry.
I'm sorry, can you restate the motion that we're
So
on it?
the motion as you have it, Ms. Nelson?
Yes, the motion is to not receive the petition.
Okay, so I'll call the question. All in favor of not receiving the petition? Opposed? Myself, Councillor O'Toole, and Councillor Novick, the motion carries. Thank you, Council. I will turn to the next item on our agenda this evening, which is the public hearing for White Birch Road. I would like to begin by reading a brief statement about how we conduct a public hearing. I will then ask Mr. Humble, our CAO, to read the public hearing notice. I will then open the floor to speakers. My opening statement is that public hearings are a statutory requirement under the Local Government Act for amendments to the official community plan and/or amendments to the zoning bylaw. Tonight's public hearing is being held because council is considering an application for amendments to our zoning bylaw. Public hearings are an opportunity for any person who believes their interest is affected to present their views to council or to provide written submissions to council. There is no limit on the length of time a person may speak, and a person may speak more than once if they wish. Council welcomes input from speakers, and the role of council members during the public hearing is to listen, have an open mind, and when the speaker is finished, to possibly ask questions for clarification. Our role is not to challenge speakers on what they say, and is not to debate with speakers on their points. Written submissions have been copied and circulated to council. I indicated the number of submissions during the agenda approval. We will not read the submissions aloud. Letter writers may read their submissions, but with the knowledge that council has received and read them. Once the public hearing is closed, council must not receive any new information other than to clarify issues raised during the public hearing. Council will deliberate and make a decision under the bylaws section of the agenda, which will immediately follow the public hearing. I would now like to ask Mr. Humble to please read the public hearing notice. Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the following are excerpts from the main content from the notice of public hearing for bylaw number 2247. The Council of the Town of Sidney will hold a public hearing on March 27th, 2023 at 6 p.m. to allow the public to make verbal or written representation to Council with respect to a proposed amendment to zoning bylaw number 2015 to amend the CD 37, or Comprehensive Development Zone 37, by changing the method of calculating residential density, increasing the maximum lot coverage, and decreasing the minimum rear setback. All persons who believe that their property is affected by the proposed amending bylaws will be afforded a reasonable opportunity to be heard or to present written submissions respecting matters contained in the bylaws at the public hearing. Written comments could be submitted until 4 p.m. March 27th, today, by the following methods: email, mail, and Dropbox at the Town Hall. All correspondence submitted forms part of the public record and may be published in a meeting agenda. Copies of the proposed bylaw, as well as all background documentation, could be inspected during normal working hours of 8:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. from March 14th to March 27, 2023 at the Sidney Town Hall. And the notice has details associated with the civic address and legal description of the subject property. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I will now open the public hearing, and for a first time, I ask anyone wishing to speak to please approach the podium, and for the record, provide your name and the municipality you live in. Please come forward.
Delwyn Smith. I'm a Sidney resident and homeowner. So I'd like to express my opposition to the zoning amendments proposed in bylaw 2247, which would decrease the setback to 6.5 meters and increase the lot coverage to 35% from the current 26% allowed on the property at 2060 White Birch Road, CD 37. I am in favor of changing the calculation for the density to the FAR from the units per hectare, because that's what they use in most of the rest of Sydney and most of the rest of the province, and it's only fair that the developer would be afforded that, and also that's probably necessary for the project to go forward. So I'm not opposed to the development. I think that this much needed multi-unit housing is a better use of waterfront property than a scruffy parking lot, and the zoning amendment should allow for the density to be calculated in FAR like the rest of everywhere else. But I think the footprint of the building is too large, which brings me back to the setback, the 6.5, decrease to 6.5, and the increase in the lot coverage. A building appropriately sized or placed on this lot would not require these amendments, and I believe a suitable, financially viable development can be built there without them. In fact, the Town of Sidney rightly approved 3 previous development applications that met the current zoning requirements, except for the increase in the change to FAR. At that time, the allowable height was rezoned to 15.4 meters, nearly double that of the surrounding zoning, but with the 26% lot coverage in consideration of the increased height. The resulting open space then would be in balance with that of the surrounding properties. More importantly, the proposed building is squished against the north and west side of the properties. So thank you. The building is squished. Oh, so yeah, we've got the site plan, but in the other drawing, you can see the marina parking lot here. So
May I pause for just one moment?
Yeah.
If I could just ask staff if we could perhaps turn the screen just a little to perhaps have more of the audience able to view. Council has a screen right in front of us here. Thank you, Mr. Humble.
So the decrease in setback they want here, and I'll get to that in a moment. I hope I can finish in 4 minutes. Oh,
No,
no, I'm
sorry,
allowed
you-
to, I'm allowed to speak.
There's not a time
No,
limit on your
okay.
time to speak.
So anyway, it doesn't show the rest of the marina parking lot here, but that's the rest of the property here. So I'm sure you all know that already, but, so anyway, the proposed building is squished against the north and west sides of the property to allow Mr. Lindholm to keep his pavilion. Oh, I guess this is the marina. This is the parking lot.
Yeah, the entire property,
Yeah.
including the marina use, is
Yeah, so
shown on
this
this
is
plan.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
This is the new building, and this is the current marina parking lot, and that's the pavilion, which Mr. Lindholm wants to keep. So the way they've designed it and placed it allows the marina owner to keep his pavilion, his marina parking, and all the open space in front of the building, all to his benefit, but to the detriment of the surrounding adjacent properties. So this is not only to his current benefit, but perhaps to his future benefit, depending on what his plans are for that property later. But with the decrease in the quality of life to the residents on all other sides of the building, are not the investments of these Sidney residents as important as Mr. Lindholm's? All the cars entering the parkade at the marina would have to do, so this road, this is a 180, this is a 6.5 meters. Every car coming to the marina, every car coming into this parkade has to do a 180 into this parkade and out. All these cars parked parallel along here have to come down to the end to turn around. This is pretty tight. That would be noisy, and it's not a commercial, I mean, it might be viable in terms of engineering, but it's not a downtown parkade in a commercial area. It's a residential neighborhood with quite a lot of spacing normally around the rest of the building, so I don't think it's balanced with the rest of the surrounding neighborhood. Also, he's requested they want to move the hydrant, which is currently on their property, and put it on the other property, the Argosie's property. I don't know how they can insist on doing that, moving a fire hydrant infrastructure onto an adjacent.
Ma'am, if you could speak into the microphone, it's just the meeting's being recorded and.
Okay, so I don't know how I wonder how the applicant can insist on digging up the neighboring property and moving fire hydrant infrastructure onto it in order to achieve the minimum width required for this 180-degree turn. This bottleneck would be noisy and not desirable with that kind of tight turn. So the developer's is proposing 1.0 FAR, and he said that in order to achieve an aesthetic design, he created this step-down shape, which is bigger on the bottom. But if he could decrease the FAR slightly, for example, the resulting building footprint would also decrease, and the setbacks would be larger also. Maybe he could keep the step-down shape reminiscent of a BC ferry, just not such a big fat ferry. I'm sure there are other creative ways to meet the zoning requirements and still build a profitable, beautiful housing development that pleases everyone, not just Mark Lindholm and co. Please tell the architect to click, resize, and see what happens. Does this council really want to become known for its fat ferry fiasco? If we have to wait a couple years for the right building, that is preferable to the wrong building for the next 60 to 100 years. As the councillor who represents you on the advisory planning committee said, I think that's Mr. Rintoul, this is a special property. It's critical that we get it right. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. Please come forward.
Hi there, for the second time. I'm Kathy Onker, and I live in 2040 White Birch Road, which is right here. So this particular development, as I've been here before and spoke to you earlier, has a significant impact on myself and 40 other tenants in that building, as well as the 40 tenants in 2050, and owners in 2040 and 2050. and 2056. Mr. Lindholm is putting in rental properties. These are not affordable housing. There are 63 units planned. This building is higher than the existing buildings. It has a rooftop patio, like the earlier gentleman spoke. That will increase the noise in our area. It will provide less sunlight for everybody in 2040. It will decrease our privacy substantially. And obviously anybody in 2040 who's on that side will lose whatever view they did have. Now, I have to agree with Delwyn in that there's been many variations of this over time. And I realize that there is going to be a development there, and I'm not totally opposed to a development. But I think we need to get it right, as I spoke to before. We need to consider whether it is sufficiently necessary to put 63 units in there, or 64, or 34, as it is originally zoned for. And it doesn't fit with the neighborhood to have a luxury rental set of units in there with a rooftop patio, when this is primarily a residential neighborhood where people along here, here, and here are all, for the most part, living there full-time. This is not affordable housing. This is not consistent with, I think, what we want in our neighborhood. When I sent my letter in, I sent some photos of the existing parking lot and all the vehicles that are currently in there. I talked to your staff on Friday morning. I read the staff report on the weekend. And again, I look at the spaces for the marina, which it lists 32, and a total of 103 stalls with 54 surface stalls and 49 underground. And if you took the time to look at the photos that I provided to you, you will see that there are substantially more than 32 vehicles parked there now. And this is before the building is even built. So I question where the marina people will be located if a development requires a parking stall for each unit. And I think that we do need to get this right. I would suggest that 63 or 64 units is too many. It will substantially affect the entire neighborhood where we all are residents, tax-paying Sidney town people, for some people who will want to come in and rent seasonally. I would ask that council not pass any of these zoning amendments and reconsider having the developer put forward a much more modest proposal that would have less impact on us. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. Good evening.
Good evening, Your Worship and councillors. Thanks for your patience in hearing this. I know it's very contentious. There isn't a lot of opportunity.
Sorry, your name and...
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Tom Richards. I live actually in the drawing there in Sydney at 2050. And I just want to reiterate a few things and add a few things quickly. But first I want to say that I find that it's a process that there isn't a lot of time to get involved in it, and a lot of times people don't realize what's happening until it's happening, right? So looking at this and living right there, and I realize what's going on. I mean, I'm a boat owner myself, nice marina. Yeah, you need parking, absolutely. Building, nothing against the building. Don't even think the parking lot's very attractive. But in a previous amendment, it got a height increase at, what, 26% in the old way of measuring, and now it's also going to increase in size. And I know by the shape of it, perhaps the base has to be that big to include all the parking. I didn't look at the architectural drawings. Anyway, my point is, this easement road here is relatively narrow compared to the streets. All the traffic has to come down. It doesn't even have the benefit of going back out onto White Birch because of the size of the building. Now, I've heard excuses too that, well, we couldn't really join up with White Birch again because there's infrastructure there and the infrastructure would be hard to move. Well, I worked for decades with the second biggest city in BC, and that's what we did is we moved infrastructure. We made decisions like this, and there is no infrastructure that cannot be moved. Depends on who wants to pay for it and who's willing to pay for it. So there is no reason why there couldn't be another exit or entrance onto White Birch. Every single vehicle that comes down that easement has to make that 90-degree turn, another 90-degree turn into that parking lot, come in here, all the marina, and then turn around and go back. So people will be going back and forth on a relatively narrow easement road that also services 2056, is it? But anyway, my point is, if it was a smaller building, there could be access to White Birch. And the last thing I'm going to say is I realize that's not what we're hearing here now. We're hearing about opposing the size, the change in the bylaw. But the bylaw change would allow that to happen. And as I said at the start, sometimes there isn't really an opportunity to express for the citizens all about this. So the concerns that they have. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming forward. We'll turn to our next speaker. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor McNeil, Smith, and councillors. So I'm one of those in the Argosy in this development.
Sorry, your name and...
My name is Daniel Adam.
Thank you.
I'm on the Argosy Strata Council, and I speak with the authority of the Strata for the Argosy residents, 12 of us. We're in that property, 2056, just to the north. We share the north boundary with Marina Enterprise Limited. We also share, this is quite unique about it, and this is where our particular concern comes in, we share a driveway with Marina Enterprises. The property line goes right down the middle of that driveway. We have a real kind of a panhandle lot. It's a bit like a gooey duck down there. And the way it works is that there are two easements or agreements between ourselves and our neighbors. Each of these agreements have been in place since 1987 when the Argosy was built and gives right of access, ingress and egress to our property and to theirs so that they can use our side of that shared driveway and we can use their side. And the shared easement is 20 feet wide on their side. That's important. I'll come back to that in a moment. So I want to be clear, we don't oppose the development. We totally understand that the owner of that property wants to get a higher value on it. We actually found it quite an attractive design. Our objection is actually much more specific than that. Our property is or will be adversely affected by the development as it's currently proposed. The 63 rental units that are proposed on the commercial space on the main floor of that building will share this driveway, which did not anticipate that level of traffic or those uses at the time. So it will have to be rethought and renegotiated. The proposed development reduces the rear setback from 7.5 meters, and that's quite critical distance, as others have pointed out. That's a turning area, and a lot of traffic will come in there, and it abuts our property. To make that drive work, they're relocating a fire hydrant to a more, in our opinion, a more vulnerable spot right on the border of the properties. And some of the development is right on the easement, the 20-foot easement. So that easement, the easements, as we understand them, are a promise that each party can use either side, and we think that this plan breaks that promise by reducing the 20-foot agreement on the marina side. The easements are not intended for parking or for other uses, like drop-off zone, landscaping, parking stalls, which currently now in this plan are in that easement area. The Argosy, this is a separate point, has direct access to Lilienhofer Park and to the beach. We are worried that the number of people that will move into this property will trespass our property to get access to the park and to the beach, which they don't have directly from their property. By the way, we have met with the developer and talked about these concerns and had some assurance from the developer that there would be a fence and a vehicle gate to help with that trespassing concern, although the drawings don't show that, and we would ask council that that become part of the requirement. Another point, and this might require interpretation from staff, in the OCP 25.3.5, it notes that internal circulation patterns, roads and pathways and streets are to be connected to the existing public street. In this case, the internal circulation all connects to a shared private driveway, not to the street, not to White Birch. So these are some things that we at the Argosy would like to see to address these concerns. Our neighbor might disagree with us whether narrowing that driveway is going to really impede traffic. But what we would ask is that, what we'd like to say is we're not willing to sign a new agreement that changes those easements until we're satisfied that our property will not be adversely affected. And the developer could be required to commission a traffic study that looks at anticipated loads from their development and from ours, the existing loads, and provides an objective opinion. So we don't get into a he says, she says kind of disagreement. We at the Argosy request that. We would also like to see a development that provides access directly off White Birch. Most of the concerns that we have about vehicles and obstruction, impeding access to our property for residents and for emergency vehicles and large vehicles like for fire trucks or for ambulance, most of those objections are not there if their access is directly from White Birch Road, on which they have property frontage, instead of coming through the shared driveway. Our only access, our only way in and out of our building is along that shared driveway. During construction, there will be a lot of traffic, a lot of trucks moving in and out, construction materials coming in that way, other equipment. This is going to impact us as residents there. We're a small condo, only 12 units, but that is our only way in and out. So what we would like to see is our concerns addressed about access and easement by having access to them, even if it's one way around, to White Birch Street. So they're coming in and going out along this narrow drive, very narrow drive, that's going to be made even narrower. We have reviewed our concerns about access and easements with our lawyer, who advised that the entire width of the easement should be preserved to ensure Argosy residents are safe now and in the future. And so we at the Argosy request that the proposed development not encroach on the easement, which it intends to now. So in summary, the Argosy strata is affected by the proposed development. Frankly, we don't see how this development can proceed as designed without change to the easement or access from White Birch. That's what we wanted to bring to council. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. I do have one question of clarification, sir, and that is you made reference to a clause in our OCP with regards to internal driveways. Could you perhaps repeat that, please?
In my reading of the official community plan, 25.3.5, there's some language that says that internal circulation, and I think it's intended for bike paths, pedestrian paths, streets, to connect to the public so that they're not interfered and they join in with existing networks. That's a very good clause to have. In this case, though, all of that internal traffic doesn't join to a public road, as noted in the OCP. It joins to a private drive, a shared drive, shared between Argosy and the Marina Enterprises. This is where the bottleneck is happening, and this is the concern that the Argosy residents have. A number of them have written individual letters to council, and you'll have them in the file. I'm quite happy to answer any other questions, Mr. Mayor.
No, thank you very much. Thank you for coming forward.
Thank you.
I'll turn to our next speaker. Evening. There is a little button at the bottom there just to make the microphone live.
I'm Gail Sitwell, and I live at 2040 White Birch Road. And I love Sidney, and I think, you know, mayors and councillors have done a fabulous job of Sidney. is a beautiful place to live. It really is, and that's one of the reasons I came. But I'm a little concerned now because I don't think they've really thought about the bottleneck for traffic. I mean, it could end up, if they have 64 units, they may be couples, so they probably would each have their own car. And what if they had to have ambulances coming in? And just on a personal note, you know, I'd probably have to go to Mexico every winter just to get some sunshine because I'll be really shadowed by such a huge building. And, you know, there are just other issues, health issues, like, well, do you want a bunch of beaming lights buzzing by your place continually? Like, my windows are on one side, and they would be facing their building. So those are the only, that's the only sunlight I get. And so it's just not good. And then they have this rooftop balcony. I'm not a drinker, but most people are. You know, who's going to police that? Do we have to sit and listen to their music and their whatever that's going on? I mean, people need to enjoy themselves, but I think they need to find a self-contained place to have their parties. I just don't think that's the place for our neighborhood. We have a lot of elderly people in our building, and so why should they have to ruin their night's sleep because of, you know, there's just too much going on next door. So those are, you know, I'm not being, I was in town all day in Victoria, so maybe I'm not as well prepared as some of the other people are, but these are just some off, you know, top of my head thoughts that the way it's set up, and I love to have new neighbors, but not under those circumstances. I think they need to redefine what is a good environment for people to live in. And I think they're going to really mess up, personally, the people on Argosy, is that the name of it? And also our building, too. And, you know, just to get out of our park, you know, where we're parked, probably take us 10 minutes every time we just want to get out and go downtown. But I think one of the biggest issues, because there are a lot of seniors there, you know, lots of times there are ambulances. And how are they going to maneuver in and out of all this traffic? It's just not a good idea. It really is not. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for coming
listening.
forward. I'll call for a second time if there's anyone wishing to address council in the public hearing.
Hello, my name is Darren McCarville.
Sorry, we just have a button for the live mic there, sir.
I thought it was on. Is that better?
Yeah, you bet. And sorry, your name, sir?
Darren McCarville. Actually, we're in this building here, 2050 105B, and yeah. So there actually, to me, there are quite a few issues, and people have alluded to a few of them so far. Traffic being a major one, the size of the building being another major one, the setback being an additional one. So if you actually look at the structures around the area, the actual, even the scale of them, they're not anything close to the size of this type thing, right? And the other issue that not just myself mentioned, but other people mentioned, was the actual position of the building. It's set pretty much back to the, you know, basically to the lot line. So there's not really any place for like space. In other words, there's no, kind of in this neighborhood, like she was mentioning, there's people in these buildings that are kind of retirees and stuff like that. And, you know, I mean, this building is right up and close and personal to them, and there's not really any space, plus the actual size of it, the length. You know what I mean? I think that basically you could scale it down, and even for the developer, you could still generate income, revenue, rents, all the rest of it, right? So, and then the other thing too is the traffic, because like, I'm not too sure who brought it up though, is about this just being actual private driveway, So if this actually could be accessed directly, maybe somewhere down in here, so the actual building accessed White Birch Road, right? I think that would be a better solution type thing. I think that's all I've got to say.
Thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please come forward. The mic might just turn down a bit for you there if you like.
For my height, right? Good evening. My name is Fabiola Owen, and I do live in 2040 White Birch Road. And for me, I am a person that runs, walks, go to the gym. I'm incredibly fit. When I walk, when I run in the mornings, I see a lot of people on wheelchairs. I see people with canes. I see people with dogs. I see children running. Are we going to have safety for them? Is any safety concerns for them? The road being open, being accessible for the kids to run, for the people with their walkers, or on the wheelchairs, for people who run like me. Or we just have to wait for the traffic to go by until they give us permission to move. That's what I would like to say.
Thank you. Thank you for coming forward. We'll call for a third and final time. If anyone wishes to come forward, please come forward. Please just provide your name again.
Yes, hello.
Sorry, you just.
Sorry, there you go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just one comment. I'm not sure if I made it before, but I think I should really reiterate it. I think it's really crucial. I mean, you might have a lot of people up in arms if they can't get a decent night's sleep. And I mean, isn't that something we all should be entitled to? If you've got so much traffic buzzing around all the time, it's going to be a real issue. And people get really ill if you can't sleep at night. I know someone in particular that, you know, it's a real challenge. And it seems like a lot of seniors, as they get older, that seems to become a problem for them. So I think this is, you know, it's not just, it's a beautiful building, and yes, it would be very nice. But I think there's some real issues here that you have to look at very seriously. I think there are health issues that would come up for the people that already live in this neighborhood. And I don't think they should be ignored. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors, for your time.
I'll call for a final time. If anyone wishing to come forward, please come forward.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm Mark Lindholm. I'm President of Marina Park Marina Ltd. You've heard me before. I'm not going to repeat the things that we've said in the previous public hearing or in the presentations we've made in the past, other than to address one matter that's been raised by Mr. Adam from the Argosy Council, which is of concern, and that is the matter of the easement. I want to point out that in our understanding with our survey, and our architect is instructed not to impinge upon the easement area for any built form. So I don't think that we have done that with this drawing. Certainly something that we will be glad to take up with Argosy Council to ensure that we comply with the easement. I don't think we're out of step with it under the proposal that's before you. With respect to, I hesitate to get away from the microphone, but in order to point to the to this plan is an architectural representation. It's not a survey. This is the survey. The survey clearly shows the hydrant, even in our amended proposal is before you, is entirely on our property, and that's not changing. So that's not an issue. The other point that's been raised by more than one speaker was a matter of the access or returning to White Birch Road. Now, we didn't do this in isolation. This drawing for the termination of White Birch as a cul-de-sac or a roundabout was done with the engineering of the town of Sidney. This wasn't just us. But the fact of the matter is that there is infrastructure in the ground here. There's also a tree that is going to be protected. You can't have that driveway go out there and not impact the tree. The tree will be gone. That, together with the design requirements of the engineering department and the realities of our own infrastructure, does not allow for that secondary exit. We've looked at that multiple times. The other point that was made was that somehow this traffic arrangement is going to prohibit the access to emergency vehicles. Also not true. All designed under the auspices of your fire department, their vehicle movements, all designed to accommodate that. It's true that with these units, be more traffic down that private road, but it's a connection to a public street, which is White Birch right there. Point out also, all we're asking for is the same density zoning as our neighboring properties. There's nothing untoward to which we're asking for. The number of units is not excessive for the site, and the size of the building is also not maximizing the area. We have the substantial open area between our neighbors to the east and our neighbors, to the southeast and to the northwest. What we've heard is that people are generally in favor of the building, not even against the density, but the height. But the height is not substantially greater, if at all, to our neighboring properties, here and here. And the Argosy, which is here, we are higher than them, but not substantially. So I think those, and we also heard from one of our neighbors about pedestrian safety. Well, in our proposal, we're going to complete the cul-de-sac, the turnaround, the roundabout, whatever you want to call it, at the end of White Birch Road, which includes a sidewalk that goes all the way and connects with the adjoining park property. So the safety issue, if people want to walk on the street, I can't protect them for that. That's up to them. But if we supply them with a sidewalk, then the safety issue is satisfied. Traffic, as I've said before in the previous public hearing, of course you put more units in that neighborhood, there's going to be more traffic. But the 66 units is not going to substantially change the traffic patterns on a dead-end street that already has 80 units here, and I think 88 units here, 12 units there. It's not going to substantially change it. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Lindholm. I do have a couple of questions for clarification, if I might.
Yes, sir.
Reference has been made to the FAR calculation, which is what is proposed as requested as an amendment to the zoning bylaw. And within our current use of FAR, there's a minimum FAR and then there's a bonus density FAR.
Correct.
Can you speak to what level you are actually densifying in the use of FAR?
Yes, the base density of FAR is 0.75, and the max with the bonus density would be 1.3, and we're asking for 1.0.
So if you were to go to the maximum under FAR, how many units might that translate to, or have you done that calculation?
I personally haven't done that calculation. Maybe Ms. Verhagen can help us.
Okay. I can turn to staff after the public hearing if that's helpful.
Yeah.
Another question I have is a question that's come up from others is with regards to the property line between your property and the Argosy. What are the plans for the finished landscaping or fencing?
Well, we've offered a fence arrangement to go along here. This area, by the way, has already got I won't say substantial, but some considerable landscaping already there, trees and shrubs and the nature of things like that. And so we're proposing to put a fence along our property line to the edge of the hydrant. We can't go beyond that because the hydrant has to be accessible to the fire department, so you need a certain amount of feet about it and so on. Now, it's true that we did meet with Argosy some time ago when we first made this proposal, and they asked for us to put in a gate, electric gate fence arrangement on their property to prohibit motor vehicles from going in there. We considered that. It's very expensive, and we declined to do that. We think if there's first off, we don't think there's going to be an issue. I don't think cars are going to be driving in, going to our property and inadvertently driving into the Argosy property. I don't think that's going to happen. Some signage can take care of that. With respect to Mr. Adams' concern that people living in this building will cross over our neighbor's property to access Lillian and Hoffer Park, well, of course, we're not going to encourage that. I don't know what Argosy can do to fence or otherwise prohibit the access into that location by other people. But we certainly aren't going to encourage that.
Two more questions. One is with this drawing that's on the screen here. If I go to the traffic circle, proposed traffic circle, I'm seeing a sidewalk come from the east side, and that's planned. Is that planned to come right down to the waterfront walkway that you're proposing?
This here, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it goes along here and then along here, and yes, so indirectly at least it gets down there, yes.
Okay. Sorry, two more questions. One is, what is the existing number of parking spaces on the lot as it sits today?
Well, there's not defined spaces. It's not lined throughout. There's some areas are gravel and some are not, but it's a big site. There's a lot of parking.
Okay, do you have an approximate number? That's fine. I appreciate that.
I think the current plan tells you how many cars we can get on that site. But it's not, again, whether it was under building or surface parking, but it's that kind of number.
No,
130.
I appreciate that. I won't get into comments at this stage. And my last question is the requested rear setback variance from 7.5 to 6.5?
Yes.
Your purpose for requesting that?
Well, the main idea is to produce that building.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your input, and thank you for taking questions.
Thank you.
I will allow other speakers to come forward. Please provide your name again if you would.
Hi, I'm Kathy Unker, again in 2040. I just want to make some additional comments. I heard the developer talk about trees. Right now, there's an existing tree line across here. And he's talking about preserving one tree up here. He has talked to the other neighbors in the previous council meeting about those trees being preserved along there. But when he does put this development in, he will be, because of the proximity of that side of the building to that road, that entire strip of trees is coming out, reducing the privacy. Again, when we're talking about height.
Sorry, ma'am, you have to clarify what trees you're referring to that will come up?
There's a strip of trees along here right now.
Thank you for that, for clarifying.
He's talking about one tree up there by the sign. I'm familiar with it. They're going to preserve all the trees along there, but we will totally lose all the privacy along there because all those trees will come out when that building goes in. That building, when he's talking about height, his building is 4 stories, White Birch is 3. So White Birch is 45 feet high. His development is 50 feet high with an additional rooftop patio. So there is a height difference. Again, that's part of the issue related to the shading and the lack of privacy that others will have when there are windows going over that will basically look directly in and down on the people in 2040.
So for clarification, you stated that your building is 45 feet
high.
And this proposal is
50 feet high, and then a rooftop patio on top of that.
Thank you.
So I think there are some details that are being glossed over a bit, and I think it would be helpful to be more comprehensive about some of these things because people are shooting all kinds of information at you. There are things that still require consideration. So I would again encourage you not to make bylaw amendments until some of these other things have been considered. Thank you.
I do have a question. Is there not a row of mature trees on the 2040-2050 property? On the side between you and the proposed development?
They're mostly shrubs, but they don't go all the way up. There are some gardening, because of the age of the trees, some of those have to be clipped right now. So it's more like shrubs along there. They're not in front of the upper windows, floor 2 and floor 3.
Thank you. Please come forward.
Thank you. Tom Richards again. I'll make it quick. Maybe in Mr. Lindholm's defense, the trees along that west side of the proposal, they are probably going to be taken out, but I think he has plans to replace them, which is great. But the convenient tree, which is an older, large tree, and I can see why people would want to keep it, that keeps that other connection to White Birch, that can be replaced too. It's going to not last as long as a building, not even probably a quarter of the age of the building. So there's no reason why another tree can't be planted and they can have access to White Birch, because we're going to have all those vehicles constantly going up and down that easement. And that is unheard of. I've never really seen that anywhere else, maybe in some commercial sections of the city. But you know, I think that's an important consideration. It's just convenient that he cites this tree. And as for the infrastructure, again, the infrastructure can be moved. It might be expensive in some cases, maybe not, but I don't think any of the infrastructure in that cul-de-sac is a major impediment to moving, has any major impediment. So again, the size is too big. It's crammed up there too far, and it doesn't leave enough room for another access to White Birch. And that would solve a lot of problems. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll call for a final time if there's anyone wishing to come forward. With that, I will close the public hearing and, sorry, please come forward.
Sorry, I've never been in a setting like this.
That's fine. Please come forward. Take your time.
Hi, my name is Christine Knussmann. I just bought a unit in 2040 White Birch Road on 3rd floor. And I moved from Victoria and I went to Sydney because I thought it's beautiful here. And I'm shocked, and I knew that there would be a development, and I thought it would be something more pleasant, like the whole surrounding. There's townhouses, there's lots of greenery between, there's more townhouses behind us, and I thought it would be pleasant like that. And this is hugely dense. I didn't actually know it was all rental units, and the traffic, and it's just tremendous, actually, listening to all this. And I'm just one of the people, one of the examples. I'm just sort of like last minute being made aware of this. So I just only speak emotionally, and I want to plead to the council to really, really consider this project, look at this again, and think about it if this is really the right thing, if there could not be any adjustments. And the rooftop really came out of in this discussion. That's like, yeah, that's actually a big deal. You know, if you have people on a rooftop, you're just in the same height as them. It's just a lot of change, and I'm just basically shocked that this will happen. I thought I escaped it coming from Victoria, and I was hoping the town of Sydney will do better, do something. Slight adjustments to this. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. Please come forward.
So I just had to, the one commonality
Sorry,
with
your
all
name
of
again?
this-
Your name again,
Darren
sir?
McCarville, 105B, right over there. The one commonality that I can see through this is that the developer and the owner, they're never gonna live here, right? The people that are gonna be most affected are gonna be the people that are living here 24/7. You know, they're retirees, like there's lots of people in probably all three, that this is their home, this has been their home for 40 years, right? And they don't really have any recourse, right? So you know, the other thing with the sound thing, no disrespect intended, but just saying this won't create an issue. Well, he's not gonna be there at, 10 o'clock at night when cars are going up and down the road. The other issue that Tom and I actually discussed was if this building is in fact 4 stories high and proximity basically to this one, it creates a hallway effect. If you ever seen how a speaker works, the whole premises, it reverberates, right? So any sound produced through that corridor will be amplified, right? So in other words, you're basically just basically that, amplifying the problem, right? So I still think that the developer can still go away and come up with a better plan because it's going to be 100% rentals. So even if you look at, I studied this extensively. There's 63 units. It works out to 113 bedrooms. It works out to a good volume of people, right? So, it's just the sheer size and number. There's also good revenue generated from the marina itself. So I almost think it's got to be a situation of, do you want to keep the marina or do you want the building? Because, you know what I mean? To me, this whole plan doesn't take into consideration the residents. And one of the things you said earlier in something else related is that your mandate is to do the best by the residents of Sidney, right? And like I said, I don't know where Mr. Lindholm lives, or I don't know where his developer lives, but I don't think that they're going to be living here full time, right? So that's why that's just something I want the council and yourself to take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Please come forward, ma'am. Just about,
Okay,
there we
thank
are.
you. My name is Bernadette McEwen. I live in 307-2040 White Birch Road. And my concerns are about the general sort of quality of life with this new proposed building. I did write in a letter to you, and I summarized some of my main objections. I can't see how the developer can say that 63 units with corresponding cars to each unit cannot make a difference. White Birch Road is a very, very narrow road, and there's a huge amount of traffic now going to be created along that road with this new building. It's really a lot, and it's a very, very narrow road. I also am concerned about the noise and the air pollution that will be created by this increase in traffic. I'm quite concerned about the amount of green space because there's a very, very tiny park that we have access to there. There's a huge, again, amount of development at the end of Resthaven Road. We've got all of Resthaven by the sea. We have White Birch Road and the townhouses and those 2 apartment buildings. And there's just this tiny little patch of land. And to me, that's a huge quality of life consideration. Where are people going to go? If it's going to be a rental building, who will be renting? There's no restriction on rentals right now, so anybody can be there. Where will children play? Where will people go to walk in the park? There's a huge amount of increase in the usage of a very, very tiny park that's there. Also, when we take down trees and we put up concrete, there is an increase in the temperature that happens as well. I think the placement of the building, it's going to be very, very close to where I'm living, and of course, naturally, I'm concerned about that. That is self-interest, justified, I think. It's really going to cast, it's really going to minimize the light in on our side of the building. So I'm really concerned about that. I mean, is it possible to place the building somewhere so that more light there'll be not so much of a reduction in the light into the buildings on that side of our development in Marina Park. And I'm just wondering, you know, is there any consideration about when there's blasting, will there be any damage to our building? I'm a little concerned about that. And so I'm urging the council to be sincere with themselves and to be insightful about how we build. And I'm wondering if in this development, is there any consideration for social housing? Is any part of that building dedicated to lower cost housing that we seem to be in great need of? So those are some of my concerns. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for coming
Mayor
forward.
and Council.
You're welcome. I'll call one last time before considering closing the public hearing. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing, and I want to sincerely thank, on behalf of council, all members of the community. Some are not in attendance this evening who've sent written submissions. We appreciate receiving those, and we appreciate those of you who did attend this evening to consider and gather your thoughts and to address council. So I will now turn to item 5A on the agenda, which is bylaw number 2247, which is amendment number 42 to our zoning bylaw number 2015, which is to amend the Comprehensive Development Zone 37, also known as CD 37, by changing the method of calculating residential density, increasing maximum lot coverage, and decreasing the maximum rear setback for the proposed development on the site. Before considering a recommendation for third reading, I would open the floor just in terms of process for members of the public. So we're in the second of two stages this evening. We've had our public hearing. We're now considering the amendments to the zoning bylaw. And if we proceed with that, then we will consider the development variance permit application and the development permit application. But for the moment, we are just speaking, deliberating on the amendments to the zoning bylaw. And so before I turn to a possible recommendation from council, I will turn to council colleagues if you have any questions of staff. And sorry, I just meant to mention for the public, while council members will be asking questions of staff, and then we may have a motion on the floor and deliberate, audience members won't have or the proponent won't have another opportunity to speak this evening. So thank you again for your input. I will turn to colleagues if you have any questions. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, through to staff, and I'm sure they'll clarify if I already have this information, but in looking to the comments put forward by the applicant this evening, two items I was looking to staff to confirm. The first is around maximum residential density, and the applicant indicated that it was his understanding, recollection that this project would meet the 1.0 FAR within that range that would be available of 0.75 and 1.3. So as a first item through to staff, is that in keeping with your understanding, and is there any surety that it would be retained at that level and not go to the 1.3?
I'll defer the question to Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen.
Sure, thank you. Through the Mayor to Councillor Rintoul, if the bylaw is adopted as proposed with a base and bonus maximum density in it, the property owner could build to anywhere within that density range through a development permit and a building permit. Note that adding units in the building would require them to meet the parking bylaw as well, which requires 1 parking space per residential unit. There was a question about how many more units could be added if they went to build to a higher floor area ratio than 1.0. That's really difficult to determine because the size of a residential unit varies so much. Going from an FAR of 1 to the maximum of 1.3 is about a 30% increase in floor area. One could make a basic calculation that adding 30% more units from 63, 64 would take it up to somewhere in the low 80s. But again, that would depend on the floor area for the units, the unit size, the number of units at which bedroom layout. There's so many variables, it's hard to say.
Thank you. And if I may, Mayor?
Please continue.
Next item through to staff, if I could. I heard from applicants, from members of the public, routinely referring this to this project as 63 units. I think we had that level of expectation initially as well, but I heard the applicant, I believe, state 66 units. So if staff could clarify their current understanding in terms of the number of units, and if that change, if there was indeed one, relates to the removal of the commercial aspect, the restaurant or cafe that was originally included in the bylaw.
Sure, through the Mayor to Councillor Rintoul, the previous proposal, the development permit application, did show 63 units. That's what the report to the Advisory Planning Commission was based on. With the removal of that ground floor cafe space, that does open up some internal floor area to be converted to a residential unit. That could result in it being 64 units. Staff have not received updated floor plans, but keep in mind the development permit is for the exterior form and character of the building, not for the internal floor plan layout specifically. That has to meet zoning bylaw requirements in terms of accessible space, adaptable units, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just reiterate that I did hear the applicant say 66 units, so I'll leave my comments there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions from colleagues? Okay, we can move forward with the recommendation if council wishes.
Just have a point of clarification. So is it, by way of process, third reading, and council at that point would have the opportunity for discussion and deliberation at third reading, is that correct?
That's correct, but at third reading we would not, while we can have deliberation, we would not be able to make amendments to the bylaw. We would not be able to make changes to the bylaw that's been brought forward. Or sorry, I'm going to turn to Mr. Humble. We're under legislative process, we're able to make some changes, but not certain significant ones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is possible for council to make a motion or resolve to make changes prior to adopting the bylaw, provided that the alteration does not alter the use or increase the density, or without the owner's consent, decrease the density. So it is indeed feasible. But again, without doing those items that I just listed.
Thank you. Just before turning to council for a possible resolution, I do have a question through to staff. Two questions, I believe. And the first is, we know one of the amendments to this zoning bylaw is relaxing the setback from 7.5 to 6.5 meters on the rear setback. Can staff provide a description for other similarly zoned properties, realizing this is a comprehensive development zone, but if this was an RM7 zone with medium density, what would the rear setback be? And sorry, and also my additional question is, what would the lot coverage be?
I'll defer to Development Services staff.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. To the mayor's question, I'm just referring to the town zoning bylaw to look that information up. The RM5 zone has a minimum rear setback of 4.5 meters, which is approximately 15 feet. I'm sorry, could you repeat the rest of your question?
Sorry, the setback, rear setback and the lot coverage.
I believe you also asked about the RM7 zone, which is the multifamily high-density zone. So the RM7 zone has a rear setback requirement for apartment dwellings of 5.5 meters.
Okay.
The RM5 zone, maximum permitted lot coverage for apartment dwellings is 55%. And the lot coverage permission in RM7, the multifamily high-density zone for apartment dwellings, ranges between 55 to 65%, depending on how many required parking spaces are enclosed within the footprint of the building.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will turn to members of council if you wish to put a recommendation forward. Councilor Rintoul.
I'll move third reading of zoning bylaw number 2015, amendment number 42, bylaw number 2247.
Second.
We have it moved in second. I'll turn to Councilor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know that I'm advocating for the bylaw to be advanced with my comments here, but first off, thank you again to so many passionate residents for coming and expressing their thoughts and concerns with respect to this particular project. You know, what's so unique about this coming forward, I think, and despite the information that was just provided by staff, that the maximum lot coverage is much higher in RM7, RM5 than what's proposed here, is the unique nature of the property. And it's multi-purpose, if you will, as is proposed. So the residential component, as well as the marina and the significant parking that comes along with that. So I certainly had hoped that by eliminating, one of those functions, that being the commercial element, which was the process we went through most recently, removing it from the bylaw, that would alleviate some concern on the part of residents. And I think that quite clearly, this has created a lot of anxiety for neighbors, and for that, certainly that's very unfortunate, and sympathize with you with regard to these changes as proposed. So I'm quite concerned with the access and egress piece, and in part with the infrastructure component, particularly where White Birch exits McDonald Park Road. And I think there's probably a number of residents have raised that concern. It's one thing that remains to be on my mind, just given the type of density that this is going to permit. So I'm certainly struggling with this under the guise of the need to see some additional housing in our community. And I certainly recognize that these rental properties are not going to be necessarily anything other than market value, or frankly premier properties at higher values than market, and is not necessarily addressing the housing crisis that we would like to see addressed. So I look forward to hearing comments from my fellow councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Rintoul. I'll turn to the seconder.
I'm going to look at, also looking forward to comments from my colleagues. Thank you.
Councilor Novak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you so much to all the contributors to this evening. It was a very enlightening process. My first comment is that I think it's really important as councillors, as elected representatives of this community, that we pay strong attention to the feedback that we've received in this process. The agenda says we've received approximately 20 written comments, but I think there were some late items that had been forwarded to us, and the actual number is probably a little bit over 30, and if I'm not mistaken, there are probably 1 to 1.5 of those comments that are in either full or partial support of the project, which, with my poor math abilities, leads me to conclude that there are approximately 95% people of the people who've commented on this opposed to it. And I think as a councillor, I have to really take that into consideration. We're here to represent the community. We have to look at the facts that have been provided to us by our staff and who've worked very hard on this. I know that. We've been through this process before. It's back in front of council. I would have thought that perhaps the proponent would have come back with a proposal that, as many of the commentators tonight have suggested, would reduce the density to a point where, on balance, it would be much easier for us to say, yes, let's go ahead with this. But there have been so many challenges cited with access and egress, with infrastructure, with sight lines, with shade lines, with the general size and form of the project, that I find it very difficult to support it as it's been presented. I would love to see the proponent come back with something a little less, I would say, cumbersome, perhaps. But as it's presented today, and looking at the bylaw as it sits in front of me right now, I have a great deal of difficulty supporting it if I am truly to represent the will of that community. And so for those reasons, I'll be voting against this.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So it's always difficult when you have these, any sort of development, especially in this day and age. Sidney is a tiny footprint. There's a desperate need for housing at all levels. And so what I look at when I look at these things is I look at what are the issues that people are bringing forward. Often we hear things like concern about density and losing their view, what is the traffic going to be like, those sorts of things. And for the most part, I think those things are going to be a function of, unfortunately, we have a planet with billions of people and they need places to live. And so we have to try and make room for people as best we can. Having said that, I think we also have a responsibility to look at, as we're building up, how does it fit in this particular area? And so comments have been made that, well, there's already condos there and townhouses, and those have been built up, and that's true. But what I'm looking at is we have to look at the impact of adding even more into that area. So the things that I heard tonight and resonate with me are the issues with the ingress and egress to the property. So in terms of that narrow driveway, I think there's going to be a significant impact. To say that there's only 63 or 66 units, I think there will be a lot more than that many of cars. So that's a concern to me. I think the setbacks as are requested, those setbacks are of concern to the residents, as we heard tonight. And aside from, the reason for the reduced setbacks is just because they want to build a bigger building. So I have difficulty with this. Also, the other thing I look at is, there's always going to be challenges with any sort of development, and we've got to weigh, the impact on the local community that's going to have the impact of this, and also look at the greater benefit to the wider community in terms of housing that we need. And so I weigh those things. In this case, for me, what we're being offered in terms of potential benefit, in terms of rental units for 15 years tenure, for me, that's not a big enough benefit to the broader community to negate that negative impact on those local residents. So for me, I lean strongly towards not moving forward with the development in its proposed form. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I know I have trouble. Right now, we're only discussing the zoning amendment and how we believe that would affect the application, which is difficult to separate from other design features of the building itself. But of course, that the massing of the building and the size of the building does affect what they can do with the rest of this property, and therefore how they would be able to address some of the concerns people have with this property. I look at it from the perspective of quality of life for the surrounding buildings. The traffic to me is not, I don't really share the concern, simply because I have lived in apartment buildings that are much larger, and a lot of the fears that people have about the volume of the constancy of the traffic, right? That it's just this constant stream of traffic. I've never witnessed that with my own eyes under similar conditions. And so I kind of have to refer to my experience and how I've actually seen buildings work. So for that, I just kind of put that in a side pile about, I understand people believe it to be true, but I don't have any information that would convince me that it is true. However, I do have information about this design that does show me that there will be impacts to the quality of life of at least one unit in the Argosy building, and that's the shading study, and that the massing of this building, because of the way it's situated on the property, and you know, that setback, it does create shading for people in the southeast corner for, you know, the darkest months of the year. And it is a taller building. And again, it is larger than surrounding buildings. However, usually, as development proceeds in an area, an extra story goes up, they get slightly larger. Things go from single family to townhome, from townhome to, you know, up. And so whether it's, you know, one floor out of keeping with the surrounding neighborhood is not always the deciding factor, but how that floor is situated on the property and how it will impact the neighbors by being there, I think is an important consideration. And the way that this building is situated, I believe the neighbors are correct, that it creates a privacy issue that doesn't necessarily arise from a taller building, but does from the way this taller building has been positioned on the lot, and the massing of the design of this building. And while I know that the zoning amendment we are considering, you know, doesn't necessarily approve the design of the building or disapprove of the design of the building, it allows it as proposed. And I don't know why, once having the zoning amendment in place, the developer would, even though they could change the design of the building at the development variance and the development permit level to incorporate some better design that would, you know, still get them the zoning amendment, would still get them a density that would, you know, allow them to make the profit probably required in order to build anything in this climate. It would, I don't know why they would once they had the amendment. And so even though one speaker called it the fat fairy fiasco, it's very well phrased, I am concerned it might be too apt in that in not providing the amendment, it will be much like the original fast ferries and it'll never sail, because all these other applications have come forward under the existing zoning and they've not gone forward, and I assume because of viability. And that, you know, when these come forward, they come forward with the viability in mind. And I understand that it jeopardizes potentially jeopardizes the viability yet again. I'm inclined not to approve it, simply because I see impacts to the surrounding neighborhood that a different design could potentially mitigate.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. And first want to thank as well everybody for coming out and commenting, and all the letter writers. It's what makes democracy work and voice my spirit, quite frankly. And I also want to thank my fellow councillors who have spoken so far. I think there's such varying views here that is what makes us work as a council. To the matter at hand, sorry for meandering a little bit. I guess I look at this and I think you'll have to follow me on this before you get angry at me, because I'm going to go all over here. So I look at what they can have on the site, and I think a lot of the concerns that are being expressed would happen potentially with what could be built. So there will be traffic, there will be potential blasting or vibrations if they do an underground parking. There will be some shading for some people, not as much, because it'll be less in size. So I think a lot of those concerns, I think are they don't affect me as much, simply because I think there will be, to some extent, those things will happen anyways, with what they can do now. I am somewhat concerned when I look at the letter of rationale presented by the proponent. It almost trivializes the significance of what's being proposed here and the actual variance, which in my mind is incredibly significant, and it will have a significant impact on the neighborhood and the residents who live there for quite some time. And I have to weigh that in my decision against the fact that we need housing in our community. And when it first came forward, Councillor and O'Keefe were at the original presentation, and there were questions brought up with one of the proponents outside about affordable housing, and it was clear to me at that time that that was never the intent, based on the conversation we had, and the knowledge wasn't even there of what to ask for, which was quite concerning. So we go ahead, and now we're looking at. I was surprised at first that the UPH was still in existence in any zones in our community. Is that a reason to switch to FAR because most other places are FAR? For me, that's not a reason to. In on itself, it's not. For me, the biggest issue for me is, what are we going to, if we provide the significant variance that they're requesting, what is our community gaining back in significance? And by calculations, roughly $240,000 in bonus density amenity funding. We get a walkway easement, and we get a roundabout. And for me, I think as a town, we have more power. We can leverage for more when we ask for amenity contributions. And for me, I would have been more for this development had there been an affordable housing component. And I know people have said that this is a special piece of property. It's a valuable piece of property, and I get that. But why can't people on the lower income spectrum live in a nice area? There's no reason they can't. And I think we can't just assume that we can preclude them from these developments because it's in an area that's highly sought after. I had hoped that the Oslo would have provided that kind of housing for our community, but I saw on their website, this is a professional rental building, which is what I thought this was going to be originally. Sorry for going on too far here, but I just for me, I wish we had asked for more. I would have loved to have had a housing component that would have helped the near market and below market rentals that we are so critically in need of in this community, which the housing needs assessments referred to in the staff report. That is the need we have. The need that we're kind of meeting close to what we need for the upper levels. We need it for the people on the bottom levels. We need it for our servers. We need it for the people who bag our groceries. It's critical, and I think this could have been an opportunity that's lost. So as it sits now, I'm not in favor of it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I will speak next. I'm the only one who hasn't spoken as yet. And before I begin, I have a question through to staff. And that is, we're considering amending the zoning bylaw with the three particulars that we've described. If council were to approve the changes to the zoning, council would next consider the variance, and the variance is solely for the for repositioning the rooftop access. It's not approval for the rooftop. It's approval. It's a variance to change the rooftop access. If and when we get to that, I will comment on that further. But then, after we consider the development variance, we could approve or disapprove that. We would be moving to consider approval of the development permit. If council was to not approve the development permit, the new zoning would be in place, but the proponent's proposal would not be accepted, and the proponent would have a choice to revisit the proposal. And so I would just like to turn to staff if I've put those pieces together correctly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's correct.
Thank you. So there's three things I want to speak about. And the first is that through the 21 letters that were received in the council package and through the 27 additional letters of correspondence, to some of those speakers who wrote letters and spoke, thank you, and to those who just came and spoke, thank you as well. So we've had significant input, and there are a number of points. I won't attempt to address them all. I think a number of the points that were raised in the letter have been in full or partially addressed this evening, or were addressed at the last public hearing. But I think given the turnout and the submissions, I think it's worthy of addressing the various concerns, and then I will come to what I consider to be the larger considerations towards the end of my comments. So I've made a laundry list here. Well, I started it when I read the correspondence, but I've added to it with some of the remarks this evening. And but everything that I'm making reference to has been referred to multiple times in either the correspondence or in the speakers this evening. So while I think it may have been partially addressed or addressed in the previous meeting, I'm still going to address it tonight. And this is in no particular order. The first is with regards to the fire hydrant. We had our Fire Chief, Mr. Mickelson, in attendance at the last meeting. We had questions from council. We had the proponent has spoken this evening in terms of the location of the fire hydrant. There are codes that have to be observed when developments are done, and we're providing protective services for the community, whether they be police, fire, or allowing for ambulance access and egress. And this has been reviewed by all of our senior team in all respects, and this proposal does provide for proper and adequate emergency services to and from the property, including the location of the fire hydrants. So I'm addressing two there. One was specifically the fire hydrants, and the other one was with whether or not adequate. There would be a risk of inadequate emergency protective services to the property. The next one I want to speak to is affordable housing. Some speakers, some letter writers have said that we're not getting the affordable housing we think we are getting. I think through council's comments this evening, we're appreciative that this development in its proximity to the waterfront, albeit its purpose-built rental for at least 15 years, will not provide the levels of affordability for entry-level workers in perhaps many of our businesses downtown. However, the housing needs assessment that municipalities are required to do before they consider changes to their official community plans. So we did that at the beginning of the last term, and it demonstrated clearly that we have a need for all types of housing in our community, for home ownership, for townhouses, for the gamut, which includes rental units at different levels of affordability. I will just segue for a moment into an earlier comment with regards to it would be nice, or we would have certainly perhaps have greater support for this development if there had been an affordability component brought to it. I happen to be the representative of council sitting at the Capital Regional District, and the Capital Regional District in the 2014 to 2018 term created a $120 million housing fund called Housing First Program to build 2,000 plus affordable units in the region. And the Capital Regional District is making a great success of that. And projects in Sidney have been considered, and there are other funding opportunities from other levels of government, the federal government and BC Housing. And unfortunately, with the property values that we have in Sidney, those other levels of government cannot afford, with the monies that they are directing to affordable housing, to be able to contribute significantly to a project like this to bring in affordability. It's a reality. Our council, the previous councils have looked at bringing in affordability. We had the previous 214, 218 council had great success in creating the Aranza development on 4th Street between Sidney Avenue and Beacon with 58 units, and 28 of them are affordable units because there were supports, financial supports and other supports provided to create that. It is not realistic for this property to try and bring in those levels of supports from other levels of government. So I wanted to speak to the affordability in terms of, I think council appreciates that this project is not going to provide the lower market or below market rentals for the property, but it does bring important rental housing to our community. There were comments with regards to, well, these will turn into vacation rentals. Given the bylaw we have with vacation rentals, these units cannot turn into vacation rentals. I'll leave my comment there. With regards to reducing the easement, and I just want to speak to the easement in general. So we've had it clarified last public hearing and tonight that there has been a long time easement arrangement between the Argosy and between this property. The road width is, the drive width is approximately 20 feet wide. It's sufficient for emergency vehicles. It's been sufficient to a relatively high population of vehicles going in and out of the marina, given the size of the parking lot that they have, as well as the smaller Argosy building. The developer has indicated that they will not be encroaching on that drive aisle, on that roadway. In terms of the fence between properties and the requests, we've heard from both the Argosy and the proponent this evening that there have been discussions, and while there was a request for a fence, the fence is being provided to the limit it can be to the fire hydrant. But in terms of a gate, a motorized gate on the Argosy property that would serve the Argosy rentals, and requesting that from the proponent of this property, he has made the decision that he cannot offer this at this time. That could be something that the Argosy could look to put in, but I accept the discussions that have been held between the parties and what the outcome is. In terms of the internal driveway and whether it should connect the internal drive aisles and whether they should connect more directly than the easement drive to White Birch Road. It was something discussed. This council raised the item with the proponent in the first time earlier last year that it came forward. Yes, you can trade off the trees and that sort of thing and the infrastructure. It would change the development quite dramatically. I don't know. The development would have to bring it would have to tell council. I'm not asking for it this evening. Whether that's financially viable with the additional investment that would be required to adapt the infrastructure to do that. I feel comfortable, given that there has been a reasonable level of traffic for the marina and the Argosy on this easement right-of-way, roadway, that it may very likely be able to accommodate the additional vehicles that will come from the additional density. With regards to noise and pollution, which have been raised in the letters and have been raised by speakers this evening, what was the additional noise and pollution when the 80 units of 2040 and 2050 White Birch created? And that I will segue with that to when the 80 units of 2040 and 2050 were built, I wasn't living in the community at the time, but I would suggest that that was a rather very significant change to that neighborhood. And that there was the associated noise and pollution from those vehicles, and that remains today for the number of vehicles that are associated with the 80 units that are with that development. The school property changed to housing units. I think it's approximately 40 units, and that's a change of the use of the property. So I'm not accepting of the concern over noise and pollution in the neighborhood. With regards to the comment that because of the construction, and I'm forgetting the term that was used from the speaker, I didn't jot it down, that the noise would be amplified. I don't know the physics of that. It makes sense to a degree, but I believe there is buffering from the landscaping that is currently on the 2040 and 2050 property, and that the proponent of this development is going to significantly landscape this property. So in terms of late night noise, I'm not seeing continuous traffic as you might see on the Pat Bay Highway or something on this right of way. Yes, there will be increased traffic due to the increase in density, but I don't know that it's actually going to create a noise problem or a quality of life problem, a health problem for the residents of 2040 and 2050. I appreciate you may have differing views, but I have to consider on balance, having lived in the community for 23 years and seen a lot of development, lived in 4 provinces and seen a lot of development, and what the likely impacts would be. So I don't want to go too far back in history, but in August of 1891, the entire Sidney was farmland. And we have been densifying gradually, maybe more accelerated at various times throughout our 130-year history. But communities all over the capital region, Vancouver Island, the province and the country and the world are densifying because of our increase in population. What the previous council wanted to do during the review of the official community plan was find, with input from the community, was to find the appropriate balance for growth in our community, balancing the need for increased density with the need for green space, with the need for urban forest canopy, with the need for parks, and all of the other amenities that we have in our community. I believe we found an excellent balance in the official community plan that council approved in June of last year. And it does lead us to continue to gradually densify in our community. And I appreciate the concerns that you have in 2040 and 2050 and other residents, the Argosy, have with increasing density. But I think this is a reasonable increase in density. I do have some other concerns, and I'll come to them. But I think it is a reasonable attempt to densify in our community. I appreciate that you may desire less density. Well, I think most of us in the community would be happy with less density, maybe larger lots and less density, but we're not going that way as a society. And housing prices will only increase higher, faster and higher if we do not bring in a wide range of new housing into our community. It's not meaning that they're all of a sudden going to become more affordable than they are today. It's that it won't get worse faster. And so I want to make that comment about our official community plan, about our community, and about densifying. And I appreciate every comment that came from the residents. It represents a change in your community, and you're concerned with that. But your development represented a change in the community, and people adapted to that. And it's happening elsewhere, all over, locally and beyond. I've spoken about the emergency vehicles, parking spaces. They're meeting the parking space requirement under the existing zoning bylaw. I talked about noise, views. It's something that's tough to say, because I know for those of you who have excellent views from where you're living now, would like to keep those views. But the reality is, if there's a property that can redevelop into housing or into another use that may block your view, you're not the one closest living to the water. And so you're not going to continue to have that water view or that partial water view. And I can accept that, because I had a partial water view from when I was living, and I'm living 2 residential streets back from Robert Bay. And a big house that went in, I don't have that anymore. So I appreciate where you're coming from, but views is not a rationale for not approving this proposal. Safety, I think we've spoken to it. I think the proponent spoke to it. Through our active transportation plan, and even before our active transportation plan, previous councils, this council, staff, our experienced staff, understand very well the older demographic that we have, proportionally older demographic that we have in our community, and whether they're accessing their neighborhoods, whether they're accessing arterial roads like Resthaven, or whether they're accessing the downtown. We know we need to be more pedestrian friendly and provide the things that for crosswalk safety, speeds on roadways, and that sort of thing. So the additional sidewalk on White Birch that the proponent will build will improve safety on White Birch Road. Green space. You know, I live in the northern part. I'm less than a kilometer away from, and my wife and I and our daughter, when she was at home, walk through the neighborhood regularly. And you have Resthaven Park, which is not a small park. I heard a word this evening, tiny. I would not call Resthaven Park a tiny park. It has playground equipment in there. We're looking at, in our Parks Master Plan, at likely improving that at some point in the future. There is Melville Park, which is just on the other side of the townhouses that have come on to Resthaven. There is Lillian-Hoffer Park, a relatively small park, a tiny park. But there is what are Mary Winspear Center lands, Memorial Park Society lands, adjacent to Parkland School. And you have a wooded area with pathway through it, and then you have fields and fields of space to access as green space. So there are space. I don't think those parks that I've referred to are getting crowded with the density that we have in that portion of Sydney. We spoke to social housing. Sorry, I think I answered the question. There was a direct question whether there would be social housing in this. With regards to amenities and comments from colleagues, yes, we can ask for more amenities. But quite frankly, the proponent has to put a proposal that's financially viable. It's not all profit for developers, and we don't know. We would have to listen to the developer. We would have to negotiate through an amenities package to see if there was additional amenities available. But $250,000 in amenities is not a small or a trivial sum. And so I'll leave my comments there with regards to amenities. So let me come to the nuts and bolts of the amendments to this to the zoning bylaw. That is FAR, the density calculation, the setback, and the lot coverage. I believe FAR is reasonable, and I believe FAR is a workable density calculation for our community and most other communities that use it. This proponent is not looking to maximize FAR. They're not maximizing the floor space that will be built on this site. So I'm in favor. I support the amendment to the zoning bylaw to change FAR. With regards to the setback and lot coverage, I asked for the information to come forward again because it has been referred to staff or referred to council in terms of the lot coverage request. So the lot coverage request is going from, I'm sorry, if staff can help me, it's going from 35% to, it's going from 26 to 35%. We've heard that 35% is well under what the lot coverage is for medium density and high density multifamily developments elsewhere in Sydney. I appreciate that, again, to Councillor Rentoul's point, I appreciate that some of that arises because there is, on this unique property, a marina use as well. But with the FAR calculation and with other properties, similar properties in the community, there could be greater floor area coverage, whether it results in a higher number of units or not. There could be more square footage built on this property. So with regards to lot coverage, I actually support the lot coverage changes. I think with the lot coverage changes, a development can come forward that would meet the expectations of majority of the residents. With regards to the setbacks going from 7.5 to 6.5, we've heard from staff that in the other zones, it would be 4.5 and 5.5, I believe. 21 feet is a rear setback that is considered generous or larger compared to the setbacks that are with other multifamily buildings in our community. So I do support the changes to the zoning amendment bylaw. And with regards to my final comments with regards to the development application and the variance, I would leave those remarks and comments until we come to that on the agenda, later on the agenda if we come to that. I'll leave my comments there. Councillor Duck?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for giving a very detailed review of that. I want to remind my colleagues that we're voting on an amendment to a bylaw. And as the Mayor summarized in the last 3 points, this is what we're here to vote on, not the development that's going in there, but what it's going to look like. This is could be up to 63 units between 2 80-unit condo developments on either side. I think it's very reasonable. I think the proponent has provided good rationale for this. The road that's coming in is not a civic manner. It's an easement discussion between the Argosy and the owner, the proponent. So I think this, when FAR first came in 2016, there was a number of properties that were moved over from UHP to FAR, and I think this is the opportunity to do the same with this property, as unique as it is. And I think it gives us the potential to be careful in how we develop it. And I think this is, I will vote in support of this amendment to the zoning bylaw. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Duck. I just wanted to, again, check in with staff. If these zoning amendments were to not pass this evening, we would be left with the previous CD zoning. And the applicant would then, could consider doing a design under that zoning, or they could make a new request for similar but not the same changes to the zoning bylaw, the CD 37 bylaw.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify, yeah, they could submit based on, resubmit a plan based on the current CD zone. So that is correct. In terms of resubmitting subsequent proposal that involves a bylaw amendment, is there a stipulation in terms of time frame? Stipulation around time frame? No. Okay. Thank you. They could simply resubmit with a new proposal involving a zoning amendment.
Thank you. And having heard that, I remain supportive of these changes, but council can certainly consider this development within on the next item on the agenda within if these zoning amendments pass. If these zoning amendments do not pass, we will not be giving any consideration to the variance or the development permit. I will turn to any colleagues who wish to speak a second time. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. And thanks for the sort of summarizing those comments. I just want to say I'm not under the impression that we would ever be able to extract affordable housing out of something like this, and I think most people recognize that. The bottom line for me in terms of this is, so we're looking at the zoning bylaw amendment, which would potentially allow up to 80 new units on that plot of land, probably more realistically 66. But for me, what I'm thinking about is based on the geography of that property, where it's tucked away, the ingress and egress out of there, impact on the surrounding area. For me, I don't think that that's I don't think it's a good fit. The other thing is, I don't think, as I said before, that the potential benefit to the community is enough in terms of a 15-year rental tenure. So on the balance of everything, I'm still in favor of sticking with the current zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keefe. Seeing no further discussion, I will call the question on the motion. All in favor of the zoning amendments? Opposed? We have Councillor Novick, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Rentoul, Councillor Garnett, and Councillor Duncan opposed. The motion is defeated. So ladies and gentlemen, those bylaw amendments were defeated, and so we will not be moving forward to the next item on the agenda to consider the variance permit or to consider the development permit.
Point of order?
Yes, Councillor?
I would suggest a 5-minute recess.
Yes, I will call a 5-minute recess until 8:45. Thank you. Okay, I'll reconvene our, oh jeez, I missed the popcorn. We'll reconvene. Thank you to those who are still in attendance. I just want to speak to the remaining items on our agenda this evening. We're next going to item 5B and 5C, which are the water utility rates and the sewer service charges, which we need to do this evening because we need to move forward on the tax rates for the later in the spring. And then I will look for council's approval to then address item 6E, which is the development variance permit application at 10181 Wildflower Place. So if we could consider that this evening. And then I would ask council to consider a motion to remove all remaining items and pass a motion to have a special council meeting next Monday night. We do not have any business for a regular committee of the whole meeting, so we would consider the remaining items next Monday evening. So if I could just have a motion to move item 6C after item 5B and 5C.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor? Motion carries. So we do have one item that actually I did make reference just before the recess that we would not be moving forward this evening to consider the development variance permit application and the development permit application for White Birch Road. And it is true, we would not be able to approve those this evening because of not moving forward with the zoning bylaw amendments. But I've been advised with staff that we should propose motions to deny those applications, given our decision with regards to the zoning bylaw amendments. So if I could have separate motions with regards to the development variance, or sorry, we could have a single motion with regards to the DVP and the DP applications. Councillor Rintoul?
I'll move that the development variance permit and the development permit be denied, subject to conditions. Oh no, be denied, period.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None are opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. And we'll now turn to item 5B and 5C, which do have a joint staff report. And I will turn to Mr. Hissick, our Director of Finance, to introduce, please. Good evening, Mr. Hissick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recently approved budget included minor increases to the water and sewer user rates. These changes must be enacted through bylaw amendments, and 2 bylaws are before council tonight for consideration. On the water side, we're following our policy of passing on the annual increases to the cost of bulk water that we purchase from the Peninsula Water Commission. For sewer, the budget called for a 3.7% user rate increase to reduce the projected deficit for the year. Combined, these 2 increases will mean a cost impact of about $2.90 per quarter for an average user who consumes 5,000 gallons of water per quarter.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions before we have a recommendation. Seeing none, we have a recommendation. Oh, sorry, we would move, so we will start with 5B, and we can proceed with 3 motions for readings.
I'll move that bylaw number 2252, amendment number 2 to water utility rates and charges bylaw number 2210 be given first reading.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? None are opposed. Motion carries.
Move second reading.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed. Motion carries.
Move third reading.
Second.
All in favor? None are opposed. The motion carries. That will come forward at our next meeting for adoption. And that will now turn to item 5C. Councillor Garnett?
I'll move that bylaw number 2253, amendment number 21 to sewer service charges bylaw 1269, 1995 be given first reading.
Second.
All in favor? None are opposed. The motion carries.
Move second reading.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries unanimous.
Move third reading.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. That will come forward to a future meeting for consideration of adoption. So now we are moving to our to our next item, which is item 6C, a development variance permit application number 100332 at 10181 Wildflower Place and 2516 Amherst Avenue, which is to allow a relaxation of the minimum requirements for the front yard setback on 10181 Wildflower Place and the front yard setback and rear yard setback on 2516 Amherst Avenue to allow for the construction of a single-family dwelling on each property. We've, as indicated during approval of the agenda, we had 6 written submissions, which are included in the agenda package, and we had an additional 4 submissions that we approved during receipt of the agenda. I would turn to council for a motion.
I move that the development permit, as just read out, be approved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover to motivate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've seen a fair bit about this project, and without going into too much detail, I think it's the best use of the subdivided property. I think it does take into consideration the neighbors, the neighborhood, and the values that people rely on for a waterfront property. And I'm quite happy to support it in its present form.
Thank you, Councillor Novak. I'll turn to the seconder.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to, we've discussed this project already, but just I guess briefly to recap for the record, I support the variance that remains simply because it goes closer to the street rather than closer to a dwelling. There is a variance from the existing OCP boundaries towards the north. However, it doesn't go any closer than the previous building, and so I feel it's simply maintaining the character of the buildings on that property relative to the neighborhood as it previously stood. And I really like that they kept the properties or the development further back from the environmentally sensitive area and actually maintained the community values with the design of the building as it is. So I'm satisfied with the way it goes forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to the speakers. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I will not be supporting the recommendation. I've had time to do some reflection on this particular one, and I've looked at it from a different perspective than I did originally, and I made another site visit. And what I've done is I've incorporated a comment made by the proponent during the first presentation, where he said future homeowners are entitled to ocean views, or these future homeowners would be entitled to ocean views. And I've gone back and looked at the rationale letter from January 30th, 2023. And the whole rationale given for doing it this way, and I quote, applying the setbacks as per the zoning bylaw would only allow for a 33-foot wide or 10-meter building, thus creating undue hardship for design purposes. So from my perspective, the only thing I could do to understand what 33 foot looks like, and I'm not a designer, I'm not an architect, is to look at the lot size, which I did, and it's approximately, and compare it to my own home, because that's all I can do for comparison purposes. So my home is 4 years old. This lot is about 1.5 to 2 times bigger than my lot. I took a measuring tape out, I measured one corner of my house on the outside to the other, and my house is straight the whole way down. It's 25 feet wide. I then put the ruler on the measuring tape on the ground and stuck out another 8 feet. And my home is 2 floors, and it's ample size, and it's been designed tastefully. And so if my home can be designed tastefully at 25 feet, then what can you do with 33 feet is my thinking. And I think you can do quite a bit. But for me, the issue comes back to the entitled ocean views. If you build 2 33 feet wide homes back to back, one home loses ocean views, unless of course you go to the outside. So then you have to squash that one house down to 1 floor to get that ocean view for the other home. That's where the variances come into play. And so given that, and given the rationale expressed by the proponent, that's what this is all about. It's all about ocean views. It's not about what can be designed within the space, because you can design quality homes in 33 foot wide. easily from what I've seen. So that's my rationale for my decision. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Yeah, I support this motion going forward. It was interesting, similar to my colleague Councillor Garnett. I went back to the property and had a good look at it, but I also did something interesting through some direction from staff, is to take a look at the aerial view of this property. And I was surprised to note that the rear setback that's been requested by both these properties is greater than, or at least equal to, any of the other setbacks for any of the other properties that are adjacent to it. So this is not an unusual request. This is, I think the proponent has done a really good job of integrating this into the existing neighborhood and making it congruent. So I will continue to support this application and permit going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm going to support this as well, and I'll just suggest, I'm thankful to the developer for at least being receptive to making change. And there were some changes made to this to try and be receptive to concerns of neighbors. I recognize that it's not to their complete satisfaction at this point, but I think it's certainly a beautiful neighborhood. These are beautiful homes that are being proposed for this location, and I'm again appreciative of the applicant, of the developer's willingness to go back and revisit and take a look at this project in the manner in which they did. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe as the first-time speaker.
Sure. I wasn't initially in favor of this. There have been some changes made, and I appreciate the comments from my colleagues bringing to light the fact that the setbacks are really in keeping with what is already in the neighborhood. And while it's true that, people have asked, well, there's rules in place, and why don't people just follow them? And I think, staff pointed out to us last time that we have to be a bit flexible with the rules in terms of setbacks, depending on what the particular parcel of land looks like and where it's situated. So I understand that. And also, I think it was one of my colleagues brought up last time, is that if we forced them to put the house into the footprint that's there, we could end up with something that was taller and bigger and have even a bigger impact. So when I weigh what they're presenting and weigh that against what they could potentially do, I think this is probably the best option. So I'll support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll support the motion, and I want to highlight what I think was the point brought out most strongly by those who provided submissions and may have spoken to council at a previous time. And that was the principle of providing a variance on this property, on these two properties, when the proponent was aware of what the limitations would be when the property was purchased and when it was subdivided. And as a speaker during public participation indicated earlier, and as staff spoke to council at one of our previous meetings, the provincial government, through the legislation for local governments, provides the opportunity of variances because one size does not fit all. We could have a zoning bylaw with X setbacks, X height, and so on, and it just would not work on every property in a community. And so the variance process was introduced, was brought to local government by the province to allow us to look to create the most compatible new development, redevelopment on a property with the existing neighborhood. So I understand the principle that writers and speakers have made with regards to the variance, but the variance process is there for a reason, and it's there for council's consideration. I think a term has been used previously that it can be considered a tool to try and improve a development in a location. And the second point that I think was made strongly in the submissions and speakers at previous meetings was, well, if you don't grant the variances, we will be accepting of what the development might be if it's taller, or if it's longer, or if it's closer to the water. And so I think you've heard from some colleagues this evening, and I'm sure all colleagues have considered, well, what might that actually look like? Well, one of the things that it will look like, it will be a narrow and very long development, and I think it will look unusually long across the two properties, particularly in that proximity to Wildflower and Amherst, and going down to the waterfront. The other it will do, and I like that little beach there, so we go there periodically, living in the neighborhood, and when you come down to that beach area and you look to the north, the setbacks on all of the houses are well away from the water, and that creates a character. I mean, it's great for the environmentally sensitive nature of the ecosystem, but it is also nice to be a visitor in the neighborhood, and to be able to experience that part of the community. And this right on Amherst and right up to the beach, if we go ahead and stay with the setbacks, I believe would look like an anomaly, would look out of character with the existing neighborhood. So I do appreciate those 2 points with regards to the principle of variance and with regards to being willing to consider what development. You know, there has been references to developer profit and speculation and that sort of thing. It's not really in council's purview to be considering what the profit is. We aren't presented with the pro formas, for developments and and use that in making a decision. The reality is that the proponent on these properties is not maximizing the footprint that they could be building on this property. And I think that's because they want to come up with a design that is suitable for the marketplace, but it is also consistent or fits in with the neighborhood. I'll leave my comments there. I'll look for any second-time speakers. Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed, Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. Thank you. Council, we do have a number of items remaining on our agenda this evening, and we did have a regularly scheduled committee of the whole meeting next Monday evening. However, that meeting, I'm advised by staff, will not have any new business. And so if I would ask council to consider a motion to refer all remaining items on this agenda to a special council meeting next Monday evening.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? Councillor Dutt?
Just to go through you to staff, just to make sure there's nothing left on the agenda that needs to be addressed tonight.
Through the mayor to Councillor Duck, no, I don't think there's anything on the agenda that potentially can't wait until next Monday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Council, I would ask you to turn to the last page of the agenda. And there is a motion under number 17 for us to reconvene in camera, a continuation of our meeting earlier today.
I'll move that the public interest requires that persons other than members of the council and officers be excluded from the meeting in order to reconvene the 5 p.m. in-camera meeting to consider confidential matters relating to personal information and employee relations, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? The motion carries. We'll recess for 5 minutes. Thank you. Oh, sorry. If we could have a motion to adjourn.
Adjourn.
Adjourn. Second.
All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you.